All right. Well, welcome to the show, everyone. It's good to have everybody here, and I'm grateful to be joined by Marc Wolfe, and my name is Don Baham, and we are going to get right into talking about team and company culture. So, just for a brief introduction, I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Germantown Technologies. Marc, do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, Marc Wolfe from 𝘂𝗶𝗹𝗹 Enterprises, Chief Strategist and President. We want to talk today about leadership strategies for cultivating strong tech and cyber teams. But this applies outside of technology. So we don't want to think that just because background is in technology, this is applicable to anyone that really has to interact and talks about culture or just team dynamics. So Don, kick it off.
Absolutely. One thing I do want to mention on the top of the session, and I will be mentioning it again throughout as well. We've got a PDF link for some resources for you. We'll be putting it in the chat, in the comments. We'll post it out to our other channels as well afterwards if you didn't catch it. But this is a good resource to go over kind of some of the elements of what we're talking about today. So, quick agenda. We're going to talk about why culture is so important. Why is it so hard to get it right? And we may spin off a few examples of that we've been researching over the last several weeks and months. And then we'll talk about a few elements of optimizing your cyber or tech career, kind of choosing the right employer, things to look for. And then we may, depending on time, we may get into some additional topics, again, with comments coming in or questions coming in, and we'll see where the conversation leads us. So with that, let's get started. So Marc, talk to us about why team and culture is so important from what you're seeing.
It's one of the things that people are promised, because we make a promise when you hire somebody. Here's what you're going to get in salary. Here's what's going to happen. And what part of that is that there's also a promise of this is the way it's going to be like when you work here. And that goes across any organization. But the problem is that what is promised and what's expected, there's sometimes a disconnect. And the longer that disconnect stays, the longer people are become disenchanted, they become unhappy, it becomes more toxic. So promises made and promises kept and clarity across that's just part of the fundamentals that helps build a culture.
I agree with that. Absolutely. But I do find it can be challenging, and maybe this is something we'll get to in a little bit, but thinking about how you look at a company from the outside in, understanding what their culture is, I think that, to your point of promises, it's hard to understand exactly what a company culture is like before you get in there. And so I've experienced, I know other leaders have, other professionals have, you try to evaluate some of those culture elements and understand what the promises are that are being made. And once you get inside, things might look a little different. And it leads to a lot of negative outcomes for you personally, me personally, but also for the teams. So if we don't get culture right, what are some of the negative outcomes that you've seen in your career?
Well, before we move on to that, it's hard to define culture, right? So let's, even before we talk about how it goes south, I think culture is what is in an organization if it's stated or not. And we think like, oh, we have a great culture. You can talk to leaders all the time. They're like, everybody loves it here. And I'm like, they're paid well and people stay. And I want to ask them why they think that's true. And then I want to ask the people why they think they stay and what happens. And if the answers don't align, even that is a difference in what people think culture is, right? The leaders are like, hey, because we do these things. And people are like, well, that's not it. It's not you and the pay. It's my camaraderie with my my team. Oh, okay.
It's not the pizza parties
It's
the company
or the ping pong tables or the free Red Bull. It's not that.
Yeah.
But what it is that it's defined by the people who actually are part of the culture, and leadership and people, and understanding that kind of collaboration. So if you don't define your culture, it gets defined for you. And the more people you bring in or leave, culture actually can change. If it's strong enough, it's not a strong enough culture to actually keep people, that it stays a certain way. So,
Sure.
and we could talk more about why people, what we see, the big disconnect, as you kind of talked about, is that it's people not aligning and then leaving and never telling you why. You can do all the exit interviews in the world, but people aren't going to be like, your culture is horrible. You find out about it different ways, Don. And I
After.
know in our
Yeah.
notes, we talk about how to find out your culture was horrible later.
Well, as a leader, it is a difficult, it can be a difficult element to really get your pulse on. If you don't have trust with your employees.
So pulse surveys don't figure everything out? You mean you don't send that out and it's like, if we get all smiley faces this week, we did great? That's no? Okay.
Typically not. At least that's been my experience. Maybe it's been something different for you, Mark, but no. I mean, especially if it's not anonymized, forget it. But I have found that, and I believe you agree, and there's a whole area we can unpack in this. In fact, we'll probably talk about this in our next LinkedIn Live session. But if you don't have a foundation of trust and transparency with your with the people on your team, with the people you report to, with your peers, I don't know that it's possible to have a quote unquote good culture.
Yeah, well, it's true, but how do you measure trust, right? So I think one of the things that we do with clients is, if you're going to leave and you tell people in advance, hey, by the way, in 6 months, I'm leaving, I'm moving, I'm doing something, and your boss reacts in a way where you promised me you'd stay and all this, there's an opportunity for that to be like, well, no one ever will tell you again in advance they're going to leave because of your reaction.
Yeah.
So that breaches trust, right?
Sure.
So you can't say you're willing to hear the truth and then hear it, even if you don't like it. And this comes the same in parenting, Don, right? You've talked to your kids, and if sometimes they tell you things you don't want to hear, you can overreact and go, I can't believe you did that. And they'll be like, well, I'm never going to tell you again. And they don't.
Yeah. Right.
So it's funny how it happens in life, in professional and personal life, where your reaction to what people tell you really can breach trust or build it.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. As parents of girls, especially, it can be, yeah. I mean, the tone that you use. I mean, all of that comes into play. Not just with girls, obviously, but I've had to learn, how to control that reaction in certain circumstances, in parenting and otherwise.
Right.
Certainly in the professional career as well. So
let's use some examples, though, Don.
Yeah.
So because we're talking about what the problems are, but let's use examples that people might not think are issues where you breach trust or builds a positive or negative culture.
Yeah, sure. So we've been looking at and pulling from our careers, but also looking at some more recent examples of where trust might be getting broken and leading to some negative outcomes in team culture. So one of the things that actually I think you found, which was interesting, was about 8 a.m. meetings. And
what's wrong with 8 a.m. meetings, Don?
Nothing, in my opinion. But but you have to do it right. So the commentary in the article was kind of the newer generation not understanding or not really aligning with having an early morning meeting just to have an early morning meeting. And I can understand that, wanting a little, flexibility in their schedule, get a morning workout before coming in, not have to start at 8 a.m. just because that's when we've always done it. So I get that 100%. And I think there are some circumstances, depending on how many time zones you're dealing with, that there have to be early morning meetings, but not just because that's what we've always done. So what are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, I think I remind clients all the time, if there's a meeting and it doesn't have an outcome and there's not alignment with accountability and there's not, you talk about the same thing again and again, you had a poor meeting. So outside of timing, the point is that why are we meeting? what's supposed to be getting done is everybody that's a decision maker at the actual meeting. Like there's preliminaries that happen before a meeting. The time
Sure.
just happens to be one of the elements that this article was talking about. Say, well, people don't like early morning meetings and things like that. And I think if you go beyond that, it's knowing a purpose. Like you talked about, if there's time zones where somebody halfway across the world, it's their middle of the night. Well, then guess what? You have to have them. But
Right.
if you don't explain the why, and there's not the clarity on what we're trying to accomplish, and if we had it an hour later, would it change anything? And if the answer is no, then okay, so we're just doing it because we're doing it.
Right.
And I think sometimes we
But
blame the generation.
explaining that. I mean,
Yes.
you've got to explain that. It could be time zone constraints. It could be schedule constraints. If you've got 10 people you're trying to get on a meeting, well, that might be the only time, right? So you do have to, I believe, explain the reason why, especially for again, to build that transparency and trust.
Well, it takes a lot more energy to go and have to explain why you do things. And here's the attitude of people with maybe not the best culture. First of all, I don't have to explain it to employees why. This is the way we do things here. And when you signed up, we had 8 o'clock meetings. So guess what? This is the way we're going to do things going forward. That is a way to do things, but I find out that that is not the best when you have 5 generations in the workforce. There's different attitudes to things going on. There's also a lot of things that have changed post-COVID that still are affecting people's lives. And you're thinking, really? Haven't they moved on?
Right.
Well, no.
No.
So there's a lot of different reasons why we have to do things. And I'm not saying it's going to change the 8 o'clock meeting, but let's at least understand why. And this was just one example.
Yeah, agreed. And just anecdotally, I don't like 8 a.m. meetings either. So I tend not to schedule them, but I don't mind them either.
Right.
But again, different.
And your team loves you for that, I'm sure,
Yeah.
Don.
Well, I've got mainly West Coast team members. And so, yeah, they would not love having an 8 a.m. Central time meeting for sure.
So, Don, let's look at unlimited PTO. That's
Sure.
something that's been coming up a lot lately.
Yeah.
You're like, isn't that the golden egg? Isn't this the best thing ever for people?
I would say yes, because I personally have unlimited PTO and I love it. I don't abuse it, but I certainly enjoy having unlimited PTO. But yes, we did see some reasons why that may not be working well for everyone. So one of the things that popped out for me was people that received unlimited PTO didn't feel like they could take it. They felt too much pressure from their manager or others that wasn't conducive to taking time off. So they essentially took less time than when they were accruing PTO, which seems, I don't quite understand it because that's not how my brain is wired, but this seems to be a common issue that people don't feel like they can take the PTO that they're given, especially if it's unlimited. So what have you seen, Mark?
So I've spoken to people about unlimited PTO, and depending what industry, so the technology industry has sometimes this mentality, at least what I've experienced, where they're like, I have a role and a responsibility. If I'm not here, it might not get done. It might not get done correctly. And then I'm letting down my people. So there's this guilt. There's also some people aren't really good at delegating. So if I'm a leader and I can't leave because if I'm not there, then what happens is if I'm not there, hold on. How about if they could survive without me? Oh, that's bad for me. Or how about if I'm not good at delegating? Okay, hold on. That means I'm not a good leader. And so there's a lot of things that show up.
Yes. Interesting. And that means you need to do some work on you as a leader. But, and not to shame anyone, like I wasn't good at delegating for a long time because it was my way or the wrong way. Right. And that doesn't really work if you're a leader and you want to empower your people. You've got to learn to delegate. Absolutely. And be okay if something doesn't get done right or done at all. You cannot, at least what I've learned is I cannot take on everything. So I'm going to do as much as I can when I'm available, give 100%. But when I step away, I've got to trust that the work is either going to get done somewhat right, enough to be okay. Maybe I'll fix something when I get back, maybe not. But you've got to trust your team. You've got to be able to delegate.
And that's the thing. If you don't trust your team, so let's talk about the trusting again. If you're not actually delegating to them and you don't have a succession plan for them to move up into a higher role, and you're not actually giving them roles when you go away because you answer emails constantly on vacation, what you're doing is saying, do what I do. Don't let anything go. Be on all the time, 24/7. And this is the way to be a leader. And I know in people's minds, they justify, well, that's okay. I still, we have to serve the clients and everything else. But you're actually toxic to your team without knowing it, because what you're saying is, I can't trust you to do this while I'm gone.
Right.
Because you may fail. So I think a lot of these examples.
And I think you may fail. Like, that's okay. At least but again, early on in my leadership career, I would say, this took some time to learn, but it's okay if they fail. And honestly, I love to work myself out of a job. That means that we've got the right leaders coming along to take my place. That's, I think if you can get to that place as a leader, it's a much healthier place to be and empowering for your team.
Right. And I mean, these are just two examples. We have dozens, but we don't have the time to go through everything from working on vacation to the way that you hire to return to office.
Yeah, which is a big thing. I think some of the headlines we're seeing about that may be an alternative way to do a reduction in force. But certainly there doesn't seem to be a lot of need to return to the office, other than maybe some financial implications that the company's looking at. Always good to get people together, but doesn't necessarily mean they have to be there every day in the office. So, all right. I know we don't have a ton of time to unpack all of those bad examples. Mm-hmm. Let's move to something that actually our PDF that we're giving away is related to. Mm-hmm. So, key factors to choosing the right employer. So this could be for a leader, or just a professional that hasn't reached into leadership yet. I think these examples and these tips will work for anyone, even outside of tech and cyber. Mm-hmm. But there's a couple specifically related to technology and cyber. So let's talk about, because I know this is an area, Mark, that's kind of near and dear to your heart. Let's talk about internal tools that we can use.
Yeah, so I think what happens, what I see is people don't measure a lot of data, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, we had some people leave, but they left because they went to this other company. I was like, oh, okay. Were they ever a fit? Well, they worked here for so long. Okay, that's not proving they were a fit, right? I think I've taken like 20 different behavioral assessments, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other. What I'm saying is that if you don't use a behavioral assessment, you're not really understanding your people from a data level, and you're not understanding them from a fit level and a team level. Mm-hmm. And what I say often is, when you add a new employee or take an employee away, you have a completely new team. Let me say that again. Just because you have a team with 6 people on it, when one person leaves, you have a new team. Why? Because that person had a dynamic and contributed. It could have been the person you're like, we were happy they left. Okay, you still have a new team, because that person that left actually helps your team grow, because they left, because now they were hurting the team. So one of the things that we've used, and you've seen, Don, at where you've worked in the past and even currently, predictive index is one of the things. I've used DISC, I've used Enneagram, I've used lots of different assessments. Predictive index has been one of the ones, and there will be a link in the PDF for everybody that's on this call to be able to take it for free and be able to say it takes a whole 6 minutes. Ooh. And that's one of the reasons I like it. It's not 45 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
And you've taken it, Don. What do you think about something like the predictive index and using a behavioral tool?
I think it's insightful. Like you said, use something, but I have had some success certainly with predictive index, and especially the team dynamic, understanding that, understanding each other. There's reports you can pull together that kind of give you some insight into your peers, as well as the team member leader relationship. So absolutely, I think it's a great tool to use.
And that's part of understanding, because when you say somebody's a difficult employee, but you realize for example, that they're the ones that are very financially driven, right? They're not just for their own compensation, but they're detail oriented to the point. And you look at somebody else who's more of a visionary and you're like, why are they always arguing? Well,
Right.
the visionary doesn't want constraints. And the person that is thinking about the financials and the details doesn't want to go and think big picture. And, we've seen this since the dawn of time. But the problem is if you understand it on a grid, it actually makes a lot more sense why there would be conflict.
Well, and just again, to kind of take it to the personal side too, right? If you as a parent, let's say you parent all your kids the same way,
good luck,
right? So you have to kind of understand what makes each of your kids tick, and what motivates them, how to talk with them. Same thing goes for your team members, right? So you can't treat everyone the same, as much as to some extent we have to for HR and legal standpoint. But there's nuances in that relationship that you won't understand until you use a tool like this to uncover some of those complexities in every human relationship. So absolutely recommend it. And there are other tools out there, things like 𝘁𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗃. And the point of us bringing these up is start asking about those as you're looking at a prospective employer, or even with your current employer. Can we start to bring some of these tools in to build that culture that we're looking to build at the company? So let's talk about a couple other quick things before we start to wind down. Reverse references. So I have seen this. I've done this in a unstructured sort of way in a couple different jobs. But the idea of having to provide references prior to getting that job offer. So you're going to provide, obviously, everybody that loves you and speaks all good, warm fuzzies about you. Sure, that makes sense. What about a reverse reference? So you're asking the employer, can you provide me some references so that I can talk to that person and see what they think about the company? Again, caveat, if they do this, they're gonna provide you all the warm and fuzzy ones, right? So on my own, I've done this a different way. I haven't asked the employer. I've actually gone and found and talked with people that have left the organization to get an understanding of what things are, what's the culture like. In the circumstance that I use this in, the person I spoke with said, don't take the job. And they listed all the reasons why. And I listened. I actually only did this with one person that previously left the company. So I took it, thought about it, thought about why that person's kind of makeup and philosophy wouldn't necessarily jive with this company. I have a different way of approaching security than this person did that I thought would work better with a particular company. And so I didn't take his advice. I went ahead, took the job. And while some of the things he said did come true, and I discovered those over time, I think by the way I approached the role, I had a much better experience than this individual did. So you may not take the job, but you get some insights as to why a particular approach may not work well when you look at those reverse references. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's important to understand everything that you can about an organization, but understand that you're right. People are going to have different views, different experiences. A bad moment at one restaurant means you'll never go back to that restaurant. So you have to take this under advisement. The thing is that can you adjust yourself and your expectations? Because no matter what a company says, everybody could say they love it. And before I moved to where I moved in Tennessee, I was going to move to the coast in Carolinas, and everybody loves that city I was going to move to, but it wasn't the right one for us. Now, would I say don't move there? No, it wasn't for us. So I'm happy where I live now outside of Nashville. Take it, understand it, but also understand, can you ebb and flow and adjust with what goes on? Maybe you have to be at an organization that has a culture that's evolving, and you're supposed to be the one to help it, because you listen to a podcast or you listen to something. Maybe you're supposed to be the one who's here for a reason to understand how to work in toxic cultures, because you're the leader that's going to change that. So we can't just look at this and say, oh, it's only one thing, and I want to go to everywhere where there's rainbows and butterflies. Sometimes you're going to go someplace and understand, do you have the intestinal fortitude to help them change? Or is it your role to do that? Do you want to be a leader that leads in that? Or do you want it where you're just like, I go to places where it's easier for me to work?
Right.
Different reasons.
Yep. Yeah. And just trying to understand, like you said, do you have the capacity in the role that you're coming into to be able to make that change? That's a good assessment too, to understand that, even ask those questions of different leaders. So understanding where a culture might be today, but if I jump into this role, will I have that opportunity to make an impact positively on the culture?
Yeah. So Don, we got a few minutes left. Go ahead as we wrap up, and we're going to tell them about the next one. I just put a link.
Yeah. So the link to the tips PDF is in there in the comments. We're also going to post this out to our socials for those that weren't able to see it live. So it's a HubSpot link to go grab that PDF. And then just to make sure everybody is aware, we have our next session on April 30th, same time. And the working title that we have right now, it may change, but the working title we have is Blueprint for Rebuilding Innovation, Collaboration, and Trust. So we'll get the live LinkedIn Live link going here shortly on that, so you can get signed up. Before we wrap up, if anybody has any questions, any comments, feel free to put those wherever you're viewing this, because we're streaming it out to a couple different platforms. So if we can see the comment here live, we will definitely address any questions. Brian Gray, I see your comment about agreeing that unlimited PTO without a proper culture can result in a worse culture. We've seen that. We've heard it. I think it, again, goes back to kind of building some of that foundational trust, and as a leader, understanding that you need to let go, right? Lee, good to see you out there. All right, so Mark, as we wrap up, what are the few things that you can think of from our talk that we want people to leave with today?
So download the PDF. Honestly, it's packed with information. Don put way more information in there than I would have put in there. He like hacked the page, and I love it.
I did remove some of it.
But the thing is that this is big on Don's heart, and we're real excited that he cares so much. And Don, you have a big reach. You have 10,000 LinkedIn connections, and you really care about this. You're part of a lot of volunteer organizations. We really, both of us in different ways, care about people caring about where they spend their 1,440 minutes a day. And if you're going to do this and you're part of a culture that could be changed, we really do want to help. And there's ways where we can give you tools. There's lots of free things out there, but to just go and not do anything about it, actually you're contributing to a bad culture. And leaving a job that's toxic can actually be a blessing for you beyond what you think. So we want to help. And this isn't, we're not asking for any money. We just want to be able to do this right now to go and support better cultures. Have the last word, Don.
Yeah, it's just my parting wisdom would be to stop and think. Stop and think about what you want your impact to be at the organization you're currently in with culture, or one that you want to move to. Think about how, little steps. It doesn't have to be big. Just take some action. Think about what you can do in your team. Maybe it's not even the full company. Maybe you just start with your team. Think about how you can build those relationships and that trust and culture to what you want it to look like.
Don, I love doing these with you. It looks like we have some comments. It looks like there's no thumbs down. So it looks like we're going to keep doing this, at least for a little while.
Sounds good.
See you next month.
All right. See you, everybody.